Hello and welcome to our Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Sophie. I live in Belfast. I'm an ESOL teacher and a teacher trainer. And today I'm really excited to be telling you a little bit about how we can get started with teaching literacy. Okay, our plan for today. First of all, we'll have a quick introduction to literacy. We're going to talk about our literacy learners, who they are, where they're from. We'll have a look at what challenges they face on a daily basis, but also what challenges we face as educators. We'll then have a look at how we can simplify our language when we communicate with literacy learners and also low-level English learners in general. We'll talk about why English can be a challenging language to learn. We'll have a look at how we can make our speech a little bit clearer and more concise, more to the point. We'll have a look also at what types of words and phrases we should try to use, but also try to avoid. After that, we'll take a closer look at literacy skills. What skills are involved when we write? What skills are involved when we read? And after that, we'll have a look at a few classroom activities that we can use to develop literacy. Finally, I'll share a reading list with you and we'll have a look at a few useful websites. So let's go. The first thing I'd like you to do today is think about who our literacy learners are. So for a minute, walk into a literacy classroom. Try to visualize that classroom. Who is there? Who can you see? Are they men? Are they women? Are they children? Are they young? Are they old? Where are they from? Who are those literacy learners? And I don't know about you, but I think that's a fairly tricky question to answer. And there's a good reason for this. Now, if we look at the very basic definition of literacy learners, we'll think about people who are struggling to read short, simple texts, and who are also struggling to write short and simple sentences. So this is our basic definition of who a basic literacy learner can be. And this is looking at their reading and writing skills. But in terms of saying who they are, well, the reason why it's really tricky to visualize this classroom filled with literacy learners is that technically there's no such thing as an average, standard, or typical literacy learner. What do we mean by this? Well, those people could be learning to read and write in any language for the first time when they come into our classroom. So they may not be literate in their first language. Also, they could be perfectly literate in another language, which uses a different script, for example, Arabic or Thai. And in my experience, that's the most common situation. And here, if we think about this for a second, that's when we get to realize that most of us are illiterate in some languages or in some scripts. For example, I cannot write Arabic. I've tried quite a lot, but it's never worked. Or I'm illiterate in Thai. I cannot write or read in Thai. So again, literacy learners can be people just like us who are literate in their first language, but are not familiar with our script, with the Roman alphabet. Our literacy learners may have very limited spoken English, but likewise, they could be perfectly fluent English speakers. They could be highly educated, or they may have no previous schooling experience. They could be young, middle-aged, old. They may be men, or they may be women. And the first thing that we need to think about when we're about to start a class with literacy learners is that we need to be checking with our own assumptions. We don't know who's going to join our class. And that's a wonderful thing. There's a huge diversity of literacy learners. The one thing they may well have in common is an incredible sense of purpose and motivation. And that's a wonderful thing, I'm sure you'll all agree, to have in a classroom. Now, what challenges do they face on a daily basis? And here really we're thinking about how we navigate daily life with our own autonomy. I can go and get the bus. I know how to check the schedule. I can register my son in a local primary school. I know how to fill in the form. I can make an appointment with my GP. I know that I can even go online and do that these days. But again, if you're having literacy issues, all those things are a lot more difficult. So there's a very limited access to essential information, whether it's transport, shopping. We also need to bear in mind that when we're teaching literacy, we think about our alphabet and our letters, but let's remember that some scripts also use different numbers. So we may also have to teach how to write and how to read numbers 0 to 9. And again, if you're not familiar with these numbers, well, going shopping is going to be a very different experience, isn't it? Access to education and healthcare. You know, our society relies a lot on form filling. And again, if we're not comfortable writing in a different script, that can be a very, very difficult experience. Access to employment. Obviously, there's a lot of reading involved in job hunting and filling in job applications. There's also a very reduced access to lifelong learning opportunities and professional development opportunities. So we'll find that a lot of our literacy learners may be nurses who think, you know what, I think I'm ready to move on. I think I'd really like to become a doctor now. But again, it's going to be a lot harder to access those opportunities as a literacy learner. A lot of our students have limited access to financial stability. Even simple things that we take for granted, such as opening a bank account. Again, here's another form we have to fill in. We also need to think about what the emotional challenges are. We've looked at the technical aspect of, you know, can you fill in that form? Can you read that receipt? But how does that make you feel if you're not able to navigate daily life independently? And if you're constantly relying on other people's help? That can lead to low self-esteem, a sense of frustration, sometimes shame, and that often leads to a sense of isolation. It's been found as well that there's a real impact on health. Not being able to read information connected to medication can lead to trouble, can lead to misuse of this particular medication. So again, people with literacy difficulties often have more workplace accidents from not being able maybe to read some of the guidelines. May misuse medication because they're having trouble reading and understanding all the relevant information from the prescription to the dosage, side effects, etc. Now, what are the challenges at our end as educators? Well, as an English teacher, we do our teacher training and then we get a job and we walk into these amazing staff rooms with amazing libraries and loads of course books that I'm sure you'll recognize, you know, your standard TEFL course books. And those are a brilliant resource. But think about it for a second. Are these books going to help us with our literacy learners? Well, not really. And the reason for that is these course books are based on the assumption that all the learners are already literate in English. So they're able to read and to write in English. So the challenges for us, our educators, is also that there's rarely a huge focus on literacy during initial teacher training. You may also find that we're not having as many opportunities in terms of continuous professional development. Other challenges are, where do we get these resources? You know, our usual TEFL or TESOL course books don't really help us. So where can we go to find our literacy-specific resources? We may also find that as a teacher, our literacy learners may be asked to join our general English class. And a lot of the time, that's how things work. So it means that we're teaching very mixed level and very mixed ability classes. And maybe that's something that we can talk about whenever we have our live Q&A session, because this can be a real challenge. How do we manage our literacy learners with our other general English learners in the same classroom so that everybody's needs are being met? Other challenges are, well, again, if you use your standard TEFL course books, you open it up and you have your table of contents, and it's wonderful. You've got a whole syllabus laid out there for you. But when it comes to teaching literacy, where do we start? And again, I suppose there's something in common here with teaching general English is we always start from our learners. And we always start from needs analysis. Where are they at? Where are they hoping to get to? And how can we help them step by step reaching their objectives? All the challenges might also be connected to establishing rapport with our literacy learners. And a lot of the time during classroom observations, I've noticed that teachers feel like, oh, but I really don't want to be infantilizing my learners. I'm teaching them the alphabet. They're fully grown adults. I feel really bad. Am I being patronizing? Again, put yourself in the literacy learner's shoes. Imagine that you're learning a language with a new script, such as Arabic or Thai or Chinese. You know what you're in for, and you know you're going to need to learn the alphabet and the characters. So I don't think that literacy learners feel patronized or infantilized. I think they're grateful that they're learning what it is they're there to learn. Now, I'm not a native English speaker, so I remember having to learn English. And I remember that some things were easy enough and some things were a bit difficult. And if we look at this quote from Gandhi, I think it's a really great quote. And I completely agree with Gandhi, saying that the English language is so elastic that you can find another word to say the same thing. However, I also think that Gandhi kind of underplayed it. I don't think you can find another word. I think you can find maybe 10, maybe 15 other words to say the same thing. And that's a wonderful thing about the English language. The range of vocabulary and lexis is wonderful. So, we can walk, we can dander, we can wander around, we can stroll, we can sprint, we can power walk. Why can't we just walk slowly or walk fast? So again, that's one of the main challenges that our literacy learners or low-level learners face when they first come to our classes. They're not quite ready to be exposed to such a wide range of language. And as educators, our job is to try to keep things step by step and not overwhelm people with loads of new vocabulary all at once. There are other challenges to learning English. I mean, spelling is always going to be one of them, even for native speakers, I believe, right? Spelling can be a challenge because it's a complex system. Pronunciation can also be a challenge because, again, when you see a word for the first time in English, can you really be sure about how you should pronounce it? And if you're still not sure, think about those 4 letters, O-U-G-H. Can you think of different ways of pronouncing those 4 letters? Well, enough, the bough of a tree, pizza dough. These 3 words have the letters O-U-G-H, but they've got a different sound. So the sound and letter correspondence in English can be a bit challenging. One letter can have different sounds, and one sound can be written with different letters. You'll also find that there's a huge variety of accents when it comes to English. And I live here in Belfast, and we can hear the difference between people who come from the west side of the city to people who live in the east side of the city. So again, for an English language learner, it's quite difficult to get used to tune into such a variety of different accents. So again, I think the starting point here when we're teaching literacy is to put ourselves in our learners' shoes. If they're new to English, we need to understand that they're facing, many challenges, especially if they're living here in an English-speaking country. So now let's look at how we can simplify our language, especially when we're speaking, to make sure that our speech is clear and concise. Now, I'm going to show you a few examples of classroom observations. I didn't make any of these sentences up, right? And we're going to have a look at what could be problematic for our learners and how we can just simplify. By simplify, I mean quantity. How can we reduce the amount of language? And quality. How can we grade our language to make it a little bit more accessible? So let's look at this first sentence together. Well, if you're new to the English language and you hear your teacher saying, if you don't know a word, just look it up. Well, you might just take this literally and go, okay, I look up. Is that how you look up a word in a dictionary? No, probably not. So again, how can we say that instead? Maybe we can just show a dictionary and say, if you don't know, just search. Okay, just look in the dictionary and see if you can find the word. But again, using the actual object will be useful. Here's another example. Take a seat and give me a shout if you need me. Now, again, that's a very warm sentence and it's a very lovely way to make somebody feel comfortable and welcome. But think about it. Take a seat. Literally? Well, then where do you put it? Give me a shout. Shout. You may get different results than you had anticipated. So think of another way of saying this. Can we not simplify and say, please sit down and ask if you need me or ask if you need help? Okay, here's the next sentence. And I love this because I think linguistically it's really complex, but it's a very common thing to hear. You'll be here tomorrow for sure now, won't you? So think about it. You're an English language learner and you've got very limited English and you're being told about tomorrow, now. What's going on? Are we speaking about the present? Are we speaking about the future? Also, those words at the end, the won't you, that question tag can be quite off-putting because the student may not realize that this is a question or that we're seeking confirmation. So another way of simplifying will be, please tell me, will you be here tomorrow? Again, let's try to be to the point. Next example. This is one of my favorite aspects of the English language because, and you'll have to tell me during our live Q&A if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen that in any other languages so far. We're making a very polite request, and to convey that politeness, we're using a negative. You wouldn't. So again, as somebody with very limited English, you might just think, well, it sounds like a negative. It sounds like I'm being told not to do something. So I won't. And again, when we say, you won't do me a favor and run to the staff room, well, somebody might just take that literally. And we also have that question tag again at the end, would you? How can we simplify this? Take a second to think of the easiest way of saying this. And I think we can maybe just say, please go to the staff room and get an extra iPad. Thank you. Here's the next one. You're the spitting image of your brother. So think about it. Spitting image, it's a lovely phrase. It's an idiom. And your higher level students are going to love learning all those idioms in English because they really give you an insight in the language and in the culture of a country. But when we're teaching very low level students, they're more likely to think about it literally. And spitting image, well, I'm not going to do a demonstration, but again, people may understand something different. So what's the easiest way of saying you're the spitting image of your brother? Again, maybe we can use our gestures and say, you really look like your brother. You look very similar to your brother. The next one is, oh, sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Can you say that again for me? And it's a beautiful way of expressing that and asking somebody to repeat. It's very natural language. And again, with our higher level students, we would love for them to be able to use that language. But when we're teaching lower level students, we might just be able to say, sorry, I didn't understand. Please repeat. Because I think most people will understand that gesture as well. And the last sentence I want to look at with you this morning is, oh, you're teaching that lesson on shopping vocabulary and your student doesn't seem to understand the word receipt. So of course you're very helpful teacher and you say, oh, what's a receipt? Look, I'll tell you. A receipt is a piece of paper you get in a shop from the cashier after you've bought something, and you should hold on to it in case you want to return the item. Now again, you might think, well, my student had a question. They didn't understand, so I explained. And it's helpful in a way, but if you think about it, they were confused about one word, and you've added so much more language to it. So every time we try to explain, we're actually just adding more and more and more language. And we could well be adding to the level of confusion with our lower level learners. So what can we do instead? Can we maybe reach for a purse and see if we can find a receipt? Could we maybe just draw a quick one on the board? Can maybe ask if anybody else in the class can help? But here the idea is that we have to be wary of lengthy explanations. Explanations in general, but especially the lengthy explanations. So, in a nutshell, words or phrases that we should try to use include systematic language when possible, especially when it comes to routines. So that, especially if you're teaching maybe younger students, sit down is not take a seat. We'll try to stick to one way of saying it's either raise your hand or put up your hand, but maybe not both. Direct imperatives, or as I believe they're sometimes called, bossy verbs. Read, write, listen, wait. And I think culturally, that's a really interesting aspect. I find that here, native speakers in the culture, here people just think, oh, but that's too direct. People might just think I'm being rude. But again, I think in a lot of other cultures, it's absolutely fine to be quite direct and to people, give me something, please. So don't worry about sounding a bit more direct. Your students will still feel the warmth and they will feel your empathy from your body language and from your facial expressions. Let's try to use literal language. So again, sit down instead of take a seat. Ask me instead of give me a shout. And really, as much as possible, we should try to aim for our commands or instructions to be as clear and as concise as possible. And asking people to do just one thing at a time. I find that numbering instructions can be quite helpful. Say, okay, so number 1, I want you to read the text. So number 1, read. Number 2, answer questions. Number 3, check with your partner. What's number 1? What's number 2? What's number 3? And it becomes an easy way to check your instructions as well. Words or phrases that we should try to avoid include colloquial phrases. And I don't want you to get the wrong message and say, oh, Sophie told us we can't use any colloquial phrases. Only when your students are ready. But again, when you think about our priorities, we need to get people to be functioning in an autonomous way. So one thing at a time. Phrasal verbs. Now, again, if you're not a native speaker, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. They're hard to learn. And maybe because we weren't taught phrasal verbs in a very helpful way. I think a lot of us were given lists and saying, okay, here are 30 phrasal verbs with get. Your test is tomorrow. And of course, the following week, they're all gone and there's no context. Negative requests. You wouldn't. I don't suppose you could. You don't happen to know. All those linguistically are really challenging for students. And the last one is the lengthy explanations that we should try to avoid. The last aspect, going back to Gandhi's quote, is the idea of using too many synonyms. Because again, instead of saying freezing, it's easy to say very cold. Instead of saying chilly, we could say it's a little bit cold. And Baltic is a phrase that's really commonly used here in Belfast. Again, we can maybe just say it's very cold. Now, what's involved in reading? Well, if you look at these pictures, how do you go from going up a hill to climbing Mount Everest? I'm sure you'll agree it's not something you do from one day to the next, and it's certainly not something you do with no training. So I'm not saying that Dickens is the Mount Everest of English-speaking literature, but again, it's challenging. How do we go from Goodnight Moon to Dickens? It's like the idea of climbing Mount Everest. We do this by training regularly with clear, specific, and achievable targets. So we're not going to be able to read the whole of Dickens in one day. But maybe when we're ready, we'll be able to look at one sentence. Maybe then we'll be able to look at a paragraph. Maybe then we'll be able to look at a page and a chapter, etc. But the idea is we really need those targets to be clear, specific, and achievable. So what's involved in learning to read? I don't know about you, but for me, that was a long time ago. And I don't really remember how I learned to read. But by teaching literacy, I had to go back in time and think, okay, how did this work for me? So here are the main reading subskills involved. Left to right orientation. So again, in the Roman script, we read and write from left to right. But of course, in Arabic, it's different. For example, I've been learning to read Arabic. I've been learning Arabic for a couple of years, and I still always pick up a book that way. I still have to go, oh, that's right. That's how I pick up the book. So you can't underestimate how deeply ingrained our own literacy and our own mother tongue is. And for your literacy learners who, let's say, maybe completely literate in Arabic, it's going to take them a long time to go from right to left, to go left to right. And that's something that we can experience as well if we try to learn a script that has a different orientation. Letter recognition. Think about uppercase, lowercase. Letters can look quite different. Word recognition. Again, you may find that some words can be written in the same way, but have a different meaning. You can shed a tear and you can tear a page. Same spelling, different meaning. Upper and lowercase again. Letter sound correspondence. We talked about this, and this is when we start to think about using the phonemic script to help some of our students as well. Alphabetical ordering. Now, I know that nowadays all our students have their smartphones and they can just download a dictionary app and they don't need to use the alphabetical order. However, it's a skill that you need to have in any language you learn. So again, we do need to teach the alphabet and the alphabetical order. Common spelling, pattern recognition, all your prefixes and your suffixes. We also need to guide our students in terms of recognizing a layout. Is this document an advert? Is this a job ad? Is this a classified? So we need to help people recognize the layout of different types of texts. And then we also need to help our students with reading skills in terms of comprehension. And that's something that we do in our general English class as well, looking at reading for gist, looking at scanning for very basic bits of information. And the last one, of course, is reading speed. And the reason why we need to encourage our students to develop their reading speed is that it will help their overall comprehension and their reading fluency. So again, one thing at a time. But as native speakers in a language, we often find that we read about 4 words at a time. Our eyes can fixate about 4 words at a time. So our goal is to try to encourage our students to be able to also increase, to go from reading 1 letter to 1 word at a time to be able to read 4 words at a time. It won't happen overnight. It's like from the hill to Mount Everest. It will take time and training, but these are our targets. What about writing sub-skills? Well, again, how do we go from writing 1 letter to writing a text? Well, like we said, it's going to take time and training. I find it really useful to also be able to empathize with my students by getting them to teach me some of their characters or letters or alphabet. Because we might think, well, the Roman script, it's ubiquitous. It's there everywhere around the world for people to see. But what we need to bear in mind is people may have seen the letters, but may not know really how to form them. Where do you start with the letter G? Where do you start with the letter M? Do you start from the left, from the right? So again, it takes training. And our writing skills here are also left to right orientation. And one way to experience this is if you're like me right-handed, take your pencil or your pen and try writing with your left hand. If you're left-handed, try writing with your right hand. And you may just want to practice writing your shopping list for tonight's dinner. And think about what are the challenges by writing with your other hand. Well, you might find that you don't really know how to hold your pen. Do you hold it that way? Do you hold it that way? You may not really be sure as to where to start forming the letter. Do you start from the left? Do you start from the right? You may also find that writing, in cursive will be, maybe for you, it might be more difficult. And also writing sentences. Will you remember to space? Will you remember punctuation? Will you be able to write straight on a line? So again, all of those skills are very practical, technical sub-skills that we can guide our students with. Now, I'll talk you through a few reading activities, but again, it'll be great to be able to see you during our live session where I'll be able to actually show you how some of these activities really work in the classroom. Number one, reading aloud, pointing to words. Again, don't worry about feeling that you're infantilizing your students. We need to go through that bit of training. Next one, ordering, and organizing, sequencing information from left to right. Next one, sorting and matching. Lower to uppercase, upper to lowercase, picture to word, word to picture. Next one, we can also use letters to play different games. And you're going to find that students also have a lot of fun with this and actually find it really useful. Labeling, really, really useful. And that's something that we can do in our classroom that we can encourage our learners to do at home as well. The next one, phonics. And that's something that people often ask about. Can you use phonics with adults? Phonics is for kids, isn't it? Well, a lot of kids use phonics to learn to read. And, I've never had adult learners who weren't willing to give it a go. You may find that some other resources do look a little bit childish. And that's one thing that I think matters a lot. Whatever reading or writing activities you use, they need to be relevant to our learners' needs, to our learners' lives. And really, there's no reason why we cannot use authentic materials. We could use leaflets that come through our post for, offers with the local supermarket, or a takeaway menu that we've got through the post as well, or the bus timetable. So many things we can use to help our students developing their literacy skills. We can use phonics. We don't have to use the picture of a cat or a mat. However, if you need to, I do think your students will be thankful because they will find it actually quite useful. The next one, again, ordering, sequencing, and using gapped sentences can also be really useful. And being able to recognize different text types. Is this a bill? Is it a calendar? Is it a notice? Is it a boarding pass? What is it? And also, like we would do with our general English learners, simple comprehension questions for gist, for skimming and scanning. Another thing we can do, and if you look on the internet, you're going to find a lot of recordings of snippets of lessons about this. It's called the natural language experience, where the teacher writes down one of the students' personal stories. After that, you can read it and you ask the student to copy it. After that, you can cut the words and ask the students to reorganize the sentences. Then they can copy them again. They can take them home and practice their sentences again. This will help with their reading, with their syntax, and their overall accuracy. Here's a link to a website where you can find a lot of other information. Now, writing activities. Again, you're going to find a lot of different activities here, whether it's using a handout with pictures and the letters all around and asking the students to reorganize the letters to make words. That's absolutely fine. Giving our students letters of the alphabet on a piece of paper and getting them to make more words. Scrabble, absolutely fine. We can also give them little worksheets where they get to see the letter and adding a little dot to show them where they're supposed to start forming the letter. This is really useful. And again, you might think it's really just for primary school children. But I'll tell you this, if I could find those kind of worksheets to help me write in Arabic, I would buy them. Because it's just a matter of going from the feeling that you're drawing a letter to knowing that you're writing a letter. Again, students can be given a picture with a sentence, then they can write a sentence that's true for them. So for example, Anna is from Poland and and see if they can write the full sentence. Giving pictures and asking people to write their sentences, asking people to write over words, to kind of trace over some of the words that you've written as well. The idea is, again, as we said early on with the range of vocabulary, the idea is not to overwhelm people with 20 words in an hour because it's just too much. It takes a long time. But as you know from teaching lower level students, the progress usually goes a lot faster as well than if you're teaching, let's say, your B1 or your more standard intermediate class. Again, one word of advice for those 6 different types of writing activities: make them relevant. Meaning always comes first. Now, here's a reading list for you to, if you're interested, to do a bit more reading and to find out a little bit more about how we can teach literacy. The first book here, Teaching Basic Literacy to ESOL Learners, is a brilliant resource to have, and you may find that your staff room may have it. And if your staff room doesn't have it, it might be a request that you can put in. The other book that, again, I think you can be found in most, CELTA centers or teaching staff rooms is Learner English. And this is really useful. It doesn't cover all languages, but it will tell you about different languages and what problems speakers of these languages may have when they're learning English. Also, in terms of literacy. There are more and more websites that are there to provide support. The reason for that is that more and more teachers are being asked to teach literacy. Especially if you're teaching in an English-speaking country, you're going to be asked at some point to teach literacy. And you might think again, going back to those challenges for educators, but where do I start? Well, a good place to start is the Gallery Teachers Workshop Library. You're going to find a lot of useful resources that can really help you get a great start when it comes to teaching literacy, teaching ESOL, and teaching very low-level learners. So again, go to the galleryteachers.com website and check the ELT workshops there. I've added a few other links to other websites that you may also find useful. Basic literacy adult learners technically are people who struggle reading short sentences and writing short sentences independently. Now that's the technical definition. However, beyond that, literacy learners can be anybody. They can be men, they can be women, they can be children, they can be grandmothers, they can be grandfathers. They could be very highly educated, or they may have very little schooling experience. They may have very little English, or they could be very fluent in English, but just have difficulties when it comes to reading and writing in English. So again, there's no such thing as the average literacy learner. And that's the brilliant thing about teaching literacy, is there's a huge range of people, a great diversity. But you may find, as we'll talk about in the session, that they have one thing in common. It's their sense of motivation and their sense of purpose. And that's brilliant. It makes our job as educators a lot easier, as you know, when we've got learners who are so eager to learn and make progress. General English teachers are more and more likely to find themselves in the situation where they may have to teach basic literacy, especially if they are teaching in an English-speaking country. There are many reasons for that, but the idea is to embrace teaching literacy. It's a new skill. It's a bit like when you're starting your teaching career and people ask you, would you be okay teaching Cambridge exam classes? And you might feel, oh, I'm not sure about this. You might be asked, are you okay to teach this literacy class? And you may feel a bit apprehensive. But I think the key is get support. Please ask for support, seek extra resources, extra training, but you are likely to be asked to teach literacy. And you'll find that being able to teach literacy will also inform your practice as a general English teacher. So I think it's something that we all have to think about more and more. Literacy teaching techniques are similar to the techniques typically used in the EFL classroom for sure. Of course, we want our lessons to be communicative. Of course, we want our lessons to be engaging, and we want the content to be personalized to our students' interests and needs. Of course, we want our lessons to be very student-centered. Of course, we want to elicit information from our learners. And of course, we want our learners to collaborate and learn from their peers. So you'll find that some techniques used in the literacy classroom might be a little bit more technical, but the overall technique and the overall ethos, I think, is very similar to what we use in our standard general English or standard EFL classroom.